Moscow has suffered another blow to its military might, this time in Belgorod. But what's being hit and why? Why is it important? Hello, everyone. Let's discuss this and more in today's newscast. We have some breaking news to start off with. According to multiple Russian sources, including those within the Russian Ministry of Defense, Ukrainian forces just hit a Russian Il-76 aircraft and an A-50 early warning and control plane. Both were at the Belbek airfield near Sevastopol in occupied Crimea. One of the Il-76s was reportedly damaged beyond repair. The A-50 is said to be one of only two functional ones remaining in the entire Russian Air Force. Remember that there are two versions of the Il-76, the normal transport version and the tanker version. It is the tanker version that is important here. That's because it's the tanker version that is capable of mid-air refueling of Russian fighter jets and bombers so that they can stay in the air for longer periods of time and perform their combat missions over Ukraine. The reason why this is significant is that since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, Ukrainian forces have been systematically targeting and destroying the aerial refueling infrastructure of the Russian Air Force. For example, in April, we reported on the destruction of an Il-78 at the Machulishi Air Base in Belarus. Now, remember that this wasn't just any Il-78. It was the only Il-78 in the entire Belarusian Air Force. So that meant that if the Russians wanted to refuel their planes over Belarus, they had to move an Il-78 from Russia every time. Now this caused a lot of problems because it took away an important asset from the already small Russian Air Force, but also because it slowed down operations because now, like I said, every time the Russians needed to refuel their planes in Belarus, they had to move an Il-78 from Russia, which put additional strain on the logistics and the supply lines. And the whole operation just slowed down. And that's exactly what Ukraine is after. They want to force the Russians to move assets around, thus spreading their resources too thin. And Ukraine's strategy is working. The thing about the Russian Air Force is that it was already small before the war. But it has become even smaller during the war because of all the losses that Russia has suffered. Not only has Ukraine destroyed a lot of Russian planes, but Russia hasn't been able to use its remaining planes as much as they would like to due to the lack of spare parts and other components. And this is where Ukraine is going all out, because with these recent attacks on the Il-76 and the A-50, Ukraine has essentially cut the aerial refueling capacity of the Russian Air Force in half. And when you combine this with the fact that Ukraine has already shut down the only two operational Il-22s, which are the Airborne Command and Control Center planes for the Russian Air Force, then you start to understand the gravity of the situation for the Russian Air Force. They simply cannot coordinate their assets, and they cannot refuel their assets. And so they have less air power than they did before the war. And to make matters worse for Russia, Ukraine is now striking them at their home bases in occupied Crimea. This means that Russia can no longer feel safe even on their own occupied territory. And this will force them to disperse their units even more, which will put even more strain on their logistics and their supply lines. And on top of that, each time they need to move, they risk further losses because the larger the area that they have to cover, the more chances there are for Ukrainian forces to detect them and strike them. But not everything is bad news. While Russia has lost a lot of its air power, Ukrainian forces are more than making up for it with the recent delivery of the NASAMS battery and the HIMARS rocket artillery. We're seeing now how Ukrainian forces are hitting Russian ammunition depots, headquarters, command centers, and airfields all across Russia. Even Kursk is not safe anymore. And believe me when I say that Kursk is very important for the Russian Air Force. It's basically their second home. At the end of last year, we reported on the fact that Ukrainian forces had struck the Engels Air Base in Russia, the largest air base in Russia. And at the time, the head of the Russian Ministry of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, was forced to admit that indeed two strategic bombers, the Tu-95s, had been damaged. And he tried to play it off like, oh well, these planes were old anyways. But don't be fooled. The Tu-95 is one of the best strategic bombers that Russia has. And even though the plane is old, it's still formidable. And the Russians know this. That's why they were so angry when Ukraine struck the Engels airbase. In response, the Russians started moving a lot of their strategic bombers to the Kursk airbase. So when Ukraine hit the Kursk airbase, they effectively neutralized another important airbase for the Russian Air Force. And this is why the Russians are so pissed off. Ukraine is hitting them where it hurts. And it's hitting them hard. As always, I'd love to hear from you. What do you think about today's breaking news? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments section below. Everyone's support motivates us to keep bringing you the most important news. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, be safe.